but I mean, if the BBC is putting a lot of stuff online, if the New York Times put their archives online, all they'd have to do is put ads up beside it, and as a whole, that would be a cash cow for them.
Actually, well, Martin Miesenholz, who runs New York Times Digital, called that very notion something like laughable. So, because of the amount of money that they collect from selling access to their archive. I think the Times is a rare exception. I think most newspapers would be way better off putting the archives out for free, but that's a fight that will happen down the road. Who has not talked yet?
The librarians that we have around point about information-seeking behavior, and the person that you trust is your wife, your father, your brothers, your relatives, people who are right near you and talk a lot. And way down the list is television, and then newspapers. And in the various subcultures, you get people who believe Wikipedia more on some little non-controversial, precise thing like bits of mathematics, and then random bloggers. And then finally, we have this triangulation. You have lots of bloggers talking about the same thing, and you try and be the judge. The question is whether newspapers should be the judge, whether that's a good thing for them to do. But the competition is not newspapers. The competition is some things that you can't do anything about, whose relatives talk to them, and TV, really.
Yeah, I find it scary that most people think that local television news is a reliable source. I'm sorry, I just find that.
But,
yeah, we were talking out in the hallway because my real interest here is trying to understand the signal to noise ratio in blogs. And you guys had some good examples of ideas about how you might self-regulate the Slashdot, for example, approach to moderating blogs. Can you explain that one a little bit?
Well, the user moderation is a great tool. It's just a very flawed one. I mean, on Slashdot, I set, how many people here read Slashdot? Just so we know, okay. Most of you. I mean, I set my moderation to 4. And I still get lots of stuff that I don't really want to see because moderators at Slashdot think if it's funny that it gets a 5. And it's not always funny. That's the problem. But it's and you know you're going to miss stuff. I mean, there are times I want to go read all the -1s just to see what they are. But this is not a perfect system. I'm counting on people in technology and information science of various kinds to really develop better tools for this. And God knows, I wish someone would bring back the kill file that existed in Usenet.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I'd like to address building an audience. I think the thing that's got me interested in blogs has been the recent campaign, and it was very hard to watch most of the broadcast media in relation to the campaign. My feeling was that they made it like a football game. They talked about strategies. They did a whole bunch of stuff that really didn't get to the heart of issues. So my feeling is that blogs are a great place for people to present these issues, to augment what's going on in commercial media and all the rest of that stuff. However, I also did some canvassing and spoke to people. And the plane on which people decide, the decision points they use. Kerry mentioned Cheney's daughter. I mean, I was down in Robeson County, and there were a lot of people who decided they weren't going to vote for him because he did that. And there's clearly an information problem here. Now, here's the heart of my question. Okay? There are a lot of people who don't take advantage of the sound bites. Blogging is a great deal, and I'm sure that everybody in this room is committed to spending the time to get the information, to synthesize it, to make comments. My feeling is that the real need for this is to get a much broader audience for this, and a lot more people involved. But it seems that I mean, we could observe there's an awful lot of resistance to the kind of effort that's required to really get this information and to use it properly. So I guess the question is, what is the feeling about how this can catch on, how we can really get people interested in it? Let's assume that a large number of people will have the access. How do how do we attract people? How do we get them to understand that this is really an important way to spread information and to learn?
And I wanted to hop in and kind of answer that question. A lot of people think that blogging is a mass market application. I mean, my sense is only a tiny portion of our community, 1%, 5%, actually cares about tomorrow's news. Most people are perfectly happy to kind of once a month read Newsweek, and I don't think blogging is for those folks. So, I wouldn't worry too much about building a mass market. I would worry about reaching people who actually care about something, and that's all the audience you need. Yes, up here. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, first of all, a lot of the first source material for blogs, it comes from journalists. And I haven't seen a lot of journalists at the town council meetings or whatever. And Ruby, sorry to tell you, but some of our council members think that Orange politics is a mountain of lies, including our town manager too. But my point, open source journalism, which is, there's two principles from open source I think apply here. One is the concept of iterative development or refinement, which is something gets out there, people start looking at it, and refine it down to the core of what it is. The other thing is the concept of 1,000 eyes on something, on code, is better than a few eyes. So blogs bring 1,000 eyes to help the iterative refinement of the news. And this is where I think we can help the news industry. And finally, one other thing, there's an axis we never talk about, which is the historical axis, which gives it credibility. As was pointed out, Eric's material is going to be out there for 2-3 years, but if you have an archive that is only accessible behind a registration wall, your credibility is diminished because your conversation always seems to be last month's conversation, and you haven't developed credibility by establishing it over a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, paywall.
So open source journalism.
Authority on what, yes,
I was responding to Will that he's right. Dave Weiner was speaking the other night about triangulation. I think he came more to from five different ways. But I think that's going to be a whole lot of the value of what bloggers bring to it. I personally, I go to, and I think Ruby does too, go to city council meetings and sit there at the press table, just like the guy next to me, from the News and Record, and put my take on it. And I think as we get further into this, people are going to, it's not going to supplant traditional media, but it's going to augment it from that standpoint, that people are going to get different viewpoints from different places, and a lot of those viewpoints are going to come from citizen blog.
I should say something just briefly if I can. I went to Slashdot for one particular thing. How many people have read Werner Vinge's Fire Upon the Deep? You know what this is about, right? So we're all talking about it right here. Vinge wrote a science fiction book in the 80s, which was really about Usenet news, and it's exactly about the noise to signal ratio. It's about everybody being a journalist. It's about too much information. It's about the information fog that you get. There's a special edition that came out 2 years ago. It's a wonderful book if you, because you'll recognize it. At the time, the only people that recognized what it was about were people who used Usenet. And, but now, a lot of the topics that we're having are there. Vinge's a very smart guy playing it out in a pretty good story. And I'm not just here to sell this book, but to give you augmented reading for later, because I think you'll start recognizing this stuff, even though the book is 15 years old or more.
I recommend it highly. Let's
Plus it's on
there
Slash
and then
Dot
there.
Review.
Go ahead.
I just actually wanted to throw another book out because I was thinking exactly the same thing of the sci-fi book that I use. I don't have any vision of my own because I use science fiction to understand things. There's a book called Bloom, and in Bloom, everybody's blog. I mean, that's the journalists are bloggers, and the lead character is essentially a blogger that a news organization hires to go on an expedition, and the book is his blog of the expedition. It's a wonderful book, sort of a Grey Goo type thing.
As you can see, rumors fly on the Galactic News Network.
And talking about signal to noise ratio, one of the things that I think keeps that relatively low is that blogs are very personal. Even I mean, it's either you writing about something that you did today, or maybe if you're an expert, then you're writing about your thing. But it's very much about the individual. And I think when a blog is able to take a beat and bring in multiple authors, then those authors exert enormous directive force on one another, and you'll get a better quality of product, whether the need is politics in one county, or even if you just want to take one book and invite multiple authors to write critique for that book, then you're not talking about a blog the way most of us think about a blog. You can certainly use a blog architecture there to have something that falls standards-wise between the personal blog and then maybe the higher factual standard of print media.
Actually, sorry, this might be a little diversion from that for a second, but I write for 7 Days newspaper in Burlington, Vermont, and I'm wondering, I came down here because it's really great to see so many bloggers and all knowledgeable and pushing the media to make changes. I'm coming from the standpoint of a reporter at a newspaper who's really wanting to see this kind of community happen in Vermont, where despite the fact that our former governor launched this huge technological explosion in mainstream media, Vermont is a very low-tech place. There just isn't this kind of community of bloggers there. And I'm wondering how a newspaper can take that leading role to help foster this community and create an alternative weekly newspaper and help foster this kind of community and push the mainstream newspaper to cover more stuff.
I've been amazed at how the alt weeklies have been actually behind big newspapers or regular newspapers in getting to the web, but that's.
Ed wants to answer.
But Ed has the answer for us.
Go back to Vermont and publish a page every week of best of the local blogs, heard around town, whatever. People will be grateful for the flow you will generate to them. They will find out about other blogs. It means somebody will have to spend time reading blogs, paying attention to make sure they don't just read the same blogs, but it'll probably take them less time than it would actually go report a story. So you get free content. You want to be careful about fair use and not run whole pages, but excerpt, run their URL. You've got free content. You're connected to your community. People will read that and say, I'm not only going to read that blog, but using Matt Gross's curve there, 1 in 20 or 1 in 100 will start their own blog.
Can I add 2 things to that, just to answer a question? Start blogging yourself. In other words, find somebody in your staff that blogs and do it. You do it, and then have the bloggers meet up. However ridiculous it may seem, maybe only 5 people will show up. Those 5 people at the beginning of your career.
There's more than that in Burlington, but the other, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk to the editorial page editors for Knight Ridder, which is the company I worked for, I don't know, 16 years. And the one place in the most newspapers where the community conversation is already happening, although not very much, is the editorial page, letters to the editor. That's what they are. And my suggestion to them was like invert it. Not right away, but over time, invert it so that the print editorial pages become the guide and best of to the conversation with the community that you do online. And I think that's a place where newspapers are just, it's already there waiting to be done, and I think it'd be a good place to get in.
Rural and small-town newspapers do this anyway with something called rural reporters. And
right.
I love my wife's family's owned a newspaper for 4 generations, and the circulation is 5,000. It's twice a week. But they have these rural reporters, and they just write, if a squirrel runs across the road, it's fair game. And I love reading.
As it were.
Yeah, well, that wasn't intentional, but thanks for catching. But what I mean to say by that is when I read these guys, read these rural reporters, I recognize them as bloggers. Very much. Some of them have invented characters that come and visit them and talk to them about things. Some of them are only interested in what's said at their church. But I mean, these often little old ladies have held those places quite a bit. So it's not unusual for a newspaper to think that way and to open those kind of things.
In the back?
And be interactive.
Nathan Walls, I work for Nano Media and keep a local blog on livejournal.com as a base 10. One of the things that I found really interesting about what the News and Record is doing, or at least one of the proposals that Lex Alexander put out, was actually opening a dialogue between the paper and the blogging community about what they're actually going to put in the paper every day. And I'm anxious to see more papers do this. I mean, some papers, including one that I used to work for out in Sacramento, at SACB, they'll actually have a community panel that comes in and comments on their daily budget. And I think it's critical for papers to actually see some of this process, from the blogging side, and then for bloggers to see just how much work there is in deciding what makes the paper, what doesn't, how it gets played, and how much it gets played.
Well, there's an issue of transparency that is a difficult one because newspapers, big media in general, have been kind of a black box. All you see is what comes out, and rather than the process. And there is a certain amount of sausage making here that you really don't want to see. But I think more transparency is clearly better than less. But it's not a simple thing to do. Partly because there's some practical pieces of this. If you start getting transparent in a way where you're about to do a critical piece on some important local topic, you might start hearing from lawyers saying, well, we want to read it first. And if you're letting other people read other things first, well, it gets tough. So if you want to do journalism, there are going to be times when you have to say no. These are not, again, as clean as I'd like them to be. By the way, I've got to just mention to everybody that the thing that is the competition from journalists of various kinds for traditional media, the competition from bloggers and others, I always welcomed that in a journalistic sense. It just made me work harder as a reporter. And that anything that makes journalists work harder and be better journalists is great. The problem that's shaping up for mainstream journalism today is a business problem more than any other. It is what I said earlier, an unraveling of the business model. And what I'm talking about is that most of what we read today and see is based on advertising for its revenue. The circulation of your daily paper, the cost you pay to buy it is a small fraction of what it costs to print it and publish it. I'm still using we as if I were there, but newspapers are in particular under attack on the revenue side, from a whole host of competitors going after each of the discrete advertising streams that add up to that big thing we call advertising. And they're under attack from people who are well-funded, nimble, hungry, willing to live on lower margins than traditional media get today, and, this is key, for whom journalism would be a ridiculous distraction. That's a tough problem. And I don't want to see big media go away in the way some folks do, because I think it serves a crucial community function. But I don't have an answer to that business problem, and whoever does could probably go run a big newspaper company, because that's the issue that they're facing right now. Anyway, I'll end of that lecture. Yes?
I want to comment. I'm Sally Green of Green Space, and I want to comment on both of some of the things y'all said. First, Paul, that's my family that owns the Gilmer Mirror, and he only thinks these characters are fictional. They're actually real. And I think when he said that that's a model for blogging, it's funny, Paul came back from the food conference in California with Dan Gilmore's book in his hand, and I stole it from him and took it to Denver with me, where I went to be with my mother at a conference with the National Newspaper Association, which is the association not for the big newspapers, but for the medium and small papers. And the first time I even mentioned the word blog in a session, I got, first I got blank stares. And then after the session, I got a newspaper publisher telling me that bloggers had no credibility. You have the pajama problem. But beyond that, you would go to, I went to one session about technology, and it was so disappointing because the discussion was all about, quote, maintaining the franchise. And what Dan is talking is very true. There's advertising. I learned early on to put bread and butter on my table, and advertising is what's important, is what they feel is at stake. My mother, who's a publisher, doesn't quite know how much of her content to put online at the risk of losing her subscription base. So there are all these kinds of issues that are out there, and I honestly don't know what the future of small town journalism is.
Yeah, if anybody did not talk about it, hand up.
I wanted to pick up on 2 points that Dan made. He commented earlier on the lack of teaching of critical thinking in the school systems, which we're all well aware of, and also the surprise that so many people take seriously television news. And of course, these are not unrelated phenomena.
Understatement of the day.
Yeah, and the point I want to make is I'm hearing a lot of optimism about the future importance of blogging, but I have a certain amount of pessimism about the future importance of literacy. And I think we need to remember that tens of millions of Americans live lives where they get their material needs met by Walmart and their infotainment needs met by Disney, Fox, Viacom, and Time Warner, pretty much. And they're totally out of touch with anything that we're talking about. I think we need to reflect on the apparent irrelevance of any concept of truth to the phenomenon of George Bush's re-election last year, when we think about how blogs are corrective to the news media and how that's going to be important. And we also, perhaps most importantly, need to think about the structures of power in our society, the command, control, and profit needs of capital, and how that's going to shape the very media that our blogging is part of in the years to come. And I think we need to think about also how, Ruby and I were talking earlier about, well, here's some ways orange politics has had an impact. Well, it has had an impact, but it's so small